Their next-door neighbor, an elderly gentleman named Michel, was the first to welcome them to the neighborhood. He was a tall, slender man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of stories. His smile was warm, but there was a certain reserve in his demeanor, a guarded look in his eyes that Jacqueline couldn't quite place. Michel lived alone in a rambling old house that mirrored the Harpers' own. The garden, however, was a stark contrast. Overgrown with weeds and shrouded in perpetual shadow, it exuded an air of neglect and mystery. The only spot of color was a solitary rose bush, its crimson blooms a stark contrast to the desolation surrounding it.
Welcome to the neighborhood. It's nice to see some new faces around here.
Despite his initial warmth, Jacqueline couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that settled over her whenever Michel was near. His presence seemed to hang heavy in the air, his piercing gaze lingering a moment too long. She tried to dismiss her feelings as mere anxiety stemming from the move, but deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. As days turned into weeks, the Harpers settled into a comfortable routine in their new home. The house, with its creaky wooden floors and vintage charm, began to feel like a sanctuary. They had moved to escape the hustle and bustle of city life, seeking solace in the countryside. The mornings were filled with the chirping of birds and the evenings with the soft glow of the setting sun. John's writing flourished in the tranquility of his study. A room bathed in the golden light of the afternoon sun. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with volumes of classic literature and mystery novels, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he spun tales of mystery and suspense, often losing track of time. The quiet of the countryside provided the perfect backdrop for his creativity, allowing him to delve deep into his imagination. Jacqueline busied herself with transforming their house into a home, her artistic touch evident in every corner. She spent hours selecting the perfect curtains, arranging flowers in vases, and choosing the right color palette for each room. Her days filled with the comforting aromas of baking bread and the soft melodies of her favorite records. The kitchen became her haven, a place where she could experiment with new recipes and create delicious meals for her family. And Sassy, her laughter echoing through the house, brought a sense of joy and lightness. Her playful antics and infectious giggles filled the rooms, making the house feel alive. Found endless adventures in the garden, her imagination running wild. She would spend hours exploring, creating fantastical stories about fairies and hidden treasures. The garden, with its overgrown hedges and blooming flowers, became her magical kingdom.
It's amazing how much peace this place brings. My stories are practically writing themselves. The serenity here is unlike anything I've ever experienced.
Yet, a palpable tension lingered beneath the surface of their idyllic life. Despite the outward appearance of tranquility, there was an undercurrent of unease that neither could ignore. Jacqueline's initial unease about Michel intensified with each passing day. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that their every move was being scrutinized. She would catch glimpses of him watching them from behind the overgrown hedges that separated their properties, his presence a constant reminder of the unknown. His piercing blue eyes following their every move, a silent observer in the shadows. It was as if he was always there, lurking just out of sight. At night, she imagined she heard the soft murmur of his voice drifting through the darkness, a haunting whisper that sent chills down her spine. Whispering words she couldn't quite decipher, but their intent felt ominous. The nights became a time of dread, filled with shadows and unspoken fears. Her attempts to confide in John were met with gentle reassurance. He would hold her close, trying to soothe her fears with logical explanations.
Jacqueline, it's just your imagination. Michel is just a lonely old man, harmless and maybe a little eccentric. There's nothing to worry about.
But Jacqueline couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. The sense of being watched, the whispers in the night, it all felt too real to be mere imagination. Michel's enigmatic presence cast a long shadow over their lives, a creeping dread that threatened to consume their newfound happiness. The once peaceful home now felt like a place of secrets and hidden dangers. A creeping dread that threatened to consume their newfound happiness. The house, once a symbol of their fresh start, now felt like a prison, with Michel's presence looming over them like a dark cloud. The Harpers were left to wonder if they had made a grave mistake in moving to this seemingly idyllic countryside. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Sassy's cheerful chatter ceased abruptly. The room, once filled with the clinking of cutlery and the hum of conversation, fell silent. The sudden change in atmosphere was palpable, and all eyes turned to Sassy, who sat frozen in her seat. Her eyes widened with fear as she stared at the window, her small hand clutching tightly at Jacqueline's arm. The once comforting glow of the evening sun now cast eerie shadows that danced across the room, amplifying Sassy's terror.
Mommy, I saw Mr. Michel again. He was watching me. Her voice trembled, and her words sent a chill down Jacqueline's spine. The mention of their enigmatic neighbor, Mr. Michel, had become a recurring nightmare for the family.
Jacqueline's heart skipped a beat. She had hoped that Sassy, in her innocence, would remain oblivious to the unsettling presence of their neighbor. The mere thought of Michel's piercing gaze fixed on her daughter was enough to make her blood run cold. She had always been vigilant, ensuring that Sassy was never alone outside, but it seemed her efforts were in vain. Sassy, with the heightened sensitivity of a child, had also picked up on the unsettling aura that surrounded Michel. John, however, remained unconvinced. He attributed Sassy's claims to an overactive imagination, fueled by Jacqueline's own anxieties. He believed that children often mirrored the fears of their parents, and in this case he was certain that Jacqueline's unease had seeped into Sassy's young mind. "Jacqueline, you're transferring your fears onto Sassy. We need to be more rational about this." His tone was firm, but Jacqueline could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He wanted to believe that there was a logical explanation, but deep down, he couldn't ignore the growing unease. But as he spoke, a shiver ran down his spine, for he too had noticed the increasingly frequent appearances of Michel at the periphery of their lives. The man seemed to be everywhere, always lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting. It was as if he thrived on the fear he instilled in others. That night, as Jacqueline lay in bed, unable to shake off the image of Michel's piercing blue eyes watching her daughter, she made a decision. She couldn't let this continue. The safety and peace of her family were at stake, and she was determined to protect them at all costs. She would get to the bottom of this mystery for the sake of her family's peace of mind, even if it meant confronting her deepest fears. With a newfound resolve, Jacqueline decided to take matters into her own hands. She would gather information, speak to neighbors, and if necessary, confront Michel directly. The thought of facing him sent a wave of dread through her, but she knew it was the only way to ensure her family's safety. Over the next few days, Jacqueline began her investigation. She spoke to neighbors, hoping to find someone who shared her concerns. To her surprise, she discovered that she wasn't alone. Several neighbors had noticed Michel's odd behavior, but like John, they had dismissed it as harmless eccentricity. One evening, while sifting through old photographs, Jacqueline found something that made her blood run cold. In the background of a family photo taken years ago, she spotted Michel, his piercing blue eyes staring directly at the camera. It was as if he had been watching them all along. She showed the photograph to John, and for the first time she saw genuine fear in his eyes. This was no longer just a figment of their imagination. Michel had been a part of their lives for far longer than they had realized. Together, they decided to take action. They would confront Michel and demand answers. It was a risky move, but they knew it was the only way to reclaim their peace of mind. As they sat together, planning their next steps, they felt a renewed sense of unity and determination. They would face this challenge together, as a family. The next day, they walked to Michel's house, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. As they stood at his door, ready to confront the man who had haunted their lives, they knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together.